Well, good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives, and there are three versions of it: McDuff Lives 1, McDuff Lives 3 on YouTube, and McDuff Lives on Facebook. We also have McDuff Lives 2, where there's a lot of archives there from when we were banned from the other channel for a while. And we still have that one to go to if we get some strikes here. So. All right. Good morning. I'm sorry I've been very busy this morning and I wasn't able to get started on time. I do apologize for that. Well, this morning I wanted to talk about some more of the topics that were raised in the reading from Treason in America, where we were talking about the connections between the the Swiss banking system and Aaron Burr, and then we named, or our author Aaron Chaikin named for us the Schlumberger family, along with the Mallet Prevost family and the Dulles family, and all of these fit together both then and now, and that's something to consider. Now, you know that Alan Dulles was stationed in Switzerland during the Second World War. He was also there before the First World War in the embassy. And his function there, we know he is coordinating things. We don't know to what extent he's working with or even for the Nazis during the war. However, we do know that he participates in setting up the rat lines after the war, and that, of course, requires him to work with the Vatican. Now, he also, of course, is a, a member of the OSS and was in in the uh, in the post-war time. Of course, it was first Donovan, but then pretty soon Dulles was able to take over and run the CIA. Well, what is the British position after the war? And what another good question was raised was how strong are the Habsburgs now, and why do we still keep track of them, and are they a force? And I think that they are in the form of the World Economic Forum as a kind of a front piece for them, but more importantly, behind the scenes, organizing the banking and manufacturing and military arms interests in order to maintain and increase the wealth of the old elite families of Europe. And that, of course, divides between Britain and the continent in one way. And then the continent itself is divided between the northern and the southern. And then you have the religious divide between the Catholic south, the Protestant north, and the Orthodox east. So that's all to set the stage for what I want to do now, which is to read from chapter 11 of this book, which is called MI6, 50 Years of Special Operations by Stephen Dorril. And I just want you guys to see how hefty this volume is, a hefty heft. And in chapter 11, we're going to pick up after the war and talk about that very subject, because one of the many things that I've learned since I started doing this work is about the area between Western Europe and Russia that is sometimes called the Pale. It is in play today in the Ukraine war. If you think about it, Ukraine and then Poland and then the Baltic states, and they can connect directly to the Scandinavian, especially Sweden, because think of even the colors of Sweden, yellow and blue, and then the same colors for Ukraine. And then there's the tradition of the Varangi and the early Vikings that would have been the settlers of Kiev and that connection between Scandinavia and Kiev, it exists in myth, if not in reality. But that division between the Western-oriented, Scandinavian-oriented Ukraine and the Russian-oriented, Slavic-oriented Ukraine is why we're having this special military operation right now. It's over Ukraine, but it's also over what I call the remnants of the Pale, or what was called during the 20th century, especially by the European empires. It was called the Intermarium, between the seas, between the Baltic Sea on the north and the Black Sea on the south. And just those are where all these countries fit in. And the main thing that strikes me is that we can't understand these countries because we have the tradition of a democratic republic in this country, and they don't. They never had it, ever, ever, ever. And so when you think of these countries in terms of what was their foreign policy, what was their religion, what was their driving force, and it's always monarchy. It's always a king or an empire or an emperor or a queen, something on top that runs the nobility, and then that's small elite um, phalanx or cohort, I should say, of maybe 5-10% of the population, but then 95% of the population is uneducated serfs. And with that being the case, democracy is frightening to an educated person, because these uneducated serfs are absolutely uneducated and kept that way on purpose so that they don't learn that they could rise up. So when you have a Romanian army or a Polish army or a Ukrainian army or battalion or whatever that is formed in the 20th century, it's not likely to be formed of highly educated people. Now, these are the salt of the earth. These are the farmers. These are the people that put the food on the table. So these are very, very important people. But when it comes time for war, they become the cannon fodder. I think that's a World War I term. Just throwing people in front of cannons and machine guns and artillery, as they did in World War I and as they did in World War II. So now let's do some reading, and I'll probably stop a lot because this is kind of a way for me to share my most current thinking on how did we get where we are. And I'm really happy to have found this book. It's probably a limited hangout in some ways, but in this chapter, I think we're getting some really good revelations. So, chapter 11, page 165. The dream of a post-war, post-Pan-Danubian federation from the Baltic to the Aegean under Habsburg rule, a sort of recreation of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was kept alive by Austrian monarchists under the direction of pretender to the throne Archduke Otto von Habsburg. The monarchists had the enthusiastic support of Winston Churchill. Okay, stop number one. Why would Winston Churchill support monarchists? Isn't he a liberal Democrat? Isn't he? Well, he's a conservative, but on the scale of monarchy, he's for the parliament. He's not for the king as uh, uh, a divine right solo act. He's an oligarchy person, is what he really is, and as David Underdown pointed out the other day, very much of an oil company person, a BP man. Well, The reason that they would want monarchies is to keep the serfs, right? To keep them dumb, to keep them knowing that they don't have a possibility of rising up and getting some of the loot that is flowing into the pockets of the rentier class, the nobles, the ones that do no work but get all the money just by renting land that they own due to some old title that was probably bought with opium profits or slave profits or any other way that you want to make your dark money. So this collection of monarchies is very much in the interest of the British imperial system, where everybody except for Britons shall be slaves if they want to, if they want them to. Quoting from their anthem, of course, Britons never, never, ever will be slaves. But what about everybody else, right? The monarchists had the enthusiastic support of Winston Churchill, who, like many of its adherents, had been a member of the Brussels-based right-wing Pan-European Union, founded in 1922 by Habsburg and Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi. Hello, Kalergi. Where have you been? Well, here's where you are now. 1922, working with Otto von Habsburg, recently dethroned from the Habsburg monarchy, but still claiming to have, been put on that throne by God. You know, I think, politicians can try to dethrone you, but if you've been put on that throne by God, then it's not going to have any effect, at least in your head, right? So this guy's still, the divine right ruler of Austria in his mind. And his buddy Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi found the Pan-European Union as the only way of guarding against an eventual world hegemony by Russia. Churchill had laid out his support for the United States of Europe in the Saturday Evening Post in February of 1930. Quote, "Let the British Empire, excluded in this plan, realize its own world spread idea. Even so, the mass of Europe, once united, once federalized or partially federalized, once continentally self-conscious, Europe, with its African and Asiatic possessions and plantations, yes, plantations, would constitute an organism beyond compare." So he's dreaming of a world dominated by monarchs of, of imperial European power that will still have colonies and plantations. And that, of course, means slaves. This is the European view of government, is you're going to be stuck with all of these serfs, and you got to figure out a way to keep them busy and make them grow the food for you. You need some kind of religion, you need some basic food source, and you need to control their minds by keeping them uneducated. That's what they wanted, and isn't that what they're doing in South America and Central America, and trying to make sure that the 90% of the people don't have enough education to figure out what the other 10% are up to. Yeah, Toto doesn't like it either. Churchill's conception, which for a time had its supporters within the Foreign Office and MI6, of a federal Europe, but with the empire still intact, did not change for the next 20 years. Churchill's and Coudenhove-Kalergi's conception of a federated Europe was enthusiastically seconded by various Central European federal study clubs located in London, Rome, and Paris. The clubs had been created by political exiles from the Russian-dominated countries, who, in turn, formed a movement known as Intermarium. Meaning between the seas, Intermarium was founded in Paris in the mid-1930s by a former Tsarist general. Okay, there's the White Russians, right? An anti-communist Catholic lay organization. It's Catholic. It brought together an alliance of militant emigre groups from Central Europe. A secret international organization, it recruited its members people whose homes are to be found in the Intermare, that part of Europe between the Baltic, the Black Sea, the Aegean, the Ionian Sea, and the Adriatic. The desired goal of the 16 nations was to create a cordon sanitaire within Central Europe and to liberate their territories from the Soviet Union. Proclaiming the necessity of a powerful anti-communist pan-Danubian federation under the name Intermarium, the aim was to hasten the overthrow of the USSR. Before the Second World War, the organization received support and funding from MI6 and French intelligence for its anti-communist operations. Within MI6, it came under the remit of Stuart Menzies, Menzies, which is pronounced in a funny way for reasons obscure to me, but I think it's something like Menzies. And in Paris, the emigres' friends, Commander Wilfred Dunderdale, his deputy Tom Green, and Charles Ellis. Although not expressly fascist, Intermarium members shared many of the characteristics and anti-Semitism of the clerical fascists. Clerical fascist means fascist associated with the church, that is, the Roman Catholic Church. And yes, we do have such people in Europe in droves. The depression of the early 30s had ravaged Central Europe, one historian wrote, like some medieval epidemic. Cancerous cells, already diagnosed in the political body, throve on its depredation. In the end, it claimed the very concept of a liberal society as its victim, and the soul of Europe already exposed to the ideologies of violence and inhumanity. A number of Central European leaders actively collaborated with the Nazis, employed by the Abwehr as pre-war agents of influence as well as informants on other emigre groups. According to American intelligence records, when the Wehrmacht marched into Eastern Europe, Intermarium became, quote, an instrument of German intelligence, unquote, though there is evidence that ties to MI6 were never completely severed. Well, see, what I've been always saying, well, I've been saying this for 6 months anyway, is that there is a third force in between the West and the Soviets and the West and the East. And this third force is connected with the Catholic Church, the old nobility of Europe, and the Phalange and the, uh, uh, oh, you know what I mean? The, somebody will know the word for it. The movement of old wealthy Europe to keep its money in the 30s and now up to today. I don't know why I can't think of that name. Although Coudenhove-Kalergi had the support of Churchill, the Foreign Office was irritated by his activities and his, quote, addiction for forming unions out of ill-assorted partners. They disliked the fact that during the war, the Prime Minister continued to back the anti-communists among the Central European Federalists because, as senior Northern Department official Jeffrey Wilson pointed out, quote, there is little evidence that the Soviet Union will be prepared to agree to federation in Eastern Europe after the war. During the spring of 1942, the issue of federation was broached with the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov, who rejected such ideas outright. Molotov said that the Soviet government had certain information to show that some federations might be directed against the Soviet Union, which in the case of Intermarium was certainly true. When the United States swung round to the Soviet viewpoint, the fate of the Federalist plans was sealed. By 1943, when the Czechs concluded an alliance with the Soviets, the idea of a Balkan Federation was dead. The socialists, social democrats, and those in the center abandoned the scheme. They continued, however, to support the ideas of federation and played an important role in founding the post-war European movement, leaving the right and extreme right groups to pursue the project. But this did not discourage the Poles, whose main political parties at the core of the resistance still believed that it would be possible to create such a federation in spite of Russian opposition. Likewise, a few officials in the Foreign Office continued to support ideas of federation and sought encouragement from the Vatican. So now you have the British Foreign Office seeking encouragement from the Vatican, whose post-war policy, it noted, would, quote, favor the creation of a large Danubian federal state if it gives promise of stability and is not controlled by Bolshevik Russia. In pursuit of this objective, as early as February 1943, the British ambassador to the Holy See, Sir Percy Osborne, had embarked on the task of presenting the Vatican with, in his own words, quote, the Bolshevist bogey dope. In the same month, there were meetings concerning German peace proposals headed by elements in the SS, which looked to the post-war world. In Bern was stationed Claude Danzy's principal lieutenant of the independent Z Network in Europe, Frederick van den Heuvel, a director of Eno's Fruit Salts, whose status as a papal count gave MI6 an entree into the Vatican. Van den Heuvel met with the head of the OSS station, Alan Dulles, and a representative of the head of the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst International Department, Walter Schellenberg. Dulles is alleged to have told his friend of 20 years, Prince Max Hohenlohe, that the peace must avoid the excesses of Versailles by permitting the existence of a greater Germany, which would include Austria and a section of Czechoslovakia. This federal Greater Germany would be part of a cordon sanitaire against Bolshevism and Pan-Slavism, which in association with a Danube Confederation would be the best guarantee of order and progress in Central and Eastern Europe. Remember, after the war, there was this Morgenthau Plan, and the Morgenthau Plan was to absolutely take away any possibility of Germany ever rearming, ever having an industry, turn it into a bunch of farmland, peasants, undo the German war machine and completely destroy the ability of Germany ever to rise up as a power again. That was Morgenthau Plan. That was, of course, overridden by the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan is consistent with what Dulles just said. That is, Dulles is saying what we need is to let the Nazis win, to let Greater Germany come back, to have, the Gross Deutsches Reich back again. It's something that somehow we've been mentally programmed not to believe that. You think of the Mel Brooks movies, just kind of making fun of Hitler and Nazism as if it's some big kind of a big joke that we can laugh off. But it's not a joke. And it's very, very attractive to people such as Alan Dulles. So what he was saying was, okay, we won the war, so now let's give Germany everything that they wanted anyway. It's stuff that you don't read in high school history books. So anyway, there you go. We have American side that wants, practically saying, "Hey, look at these two world wars that all involved Germany. Why don't we just make sure it never happens again?" Nope, not according to Alan Dulles. He's going to make sure that Germany is rebuilt and provide, the buffer for who? For Britain, right? And for Wall Street, for the whole Atlantic financial system. David, I see your comment there about Angleton, and my theory is Angleton was a Habsburg. I think he was always working for the Habsburgs, but that's just a theory. But it certainly is tempting, especially when you find him helping Otto Skorzeny escape from the camps, and it's it's interesting. We'll keep studying it, won't we? Although the Allied agreement on an unconditional peace scuppered the SS proposals, Dulles planned to pick loose the secondary Axis allies, elements of his envisioned Danube Confederation, ahead of the advancing Red Army. In particular, he made plans for Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary, where contacts with MI6 remained unbroken. He wanted to exert certain subversive pressures on these countries by establishing secret contact with, quote, influential members of the ruling classes who are not regarded as wholeheartedly in sympathy with the Nazis, unquote. One such leader was Romania's Marshal Antonescu, who sought a confederation of southwestern and central Europe in cooperation with democratic governments of the West. Dulles's plan had supporters within the Vatican, where British Representative Sir Percy Osborne was guided by Father Krunislav Draganovich, Secretary of the Confraternity of San Girolamo and representative of the Ustashi and Croatian Red Cross. Moving in the highest Vatican circles from early 1944, Draganovich began to lobby the British in favor of the Pan-Danubian Confederation, delivering a lengthy memorandum on the subject to Osborne. Churchill, too, was thinking in terms of a post-war Danubian Confederation or even a Habsburg restoration, which he told the War Cabinet would be centered on Vienna. In early 1944, Churchill established a Central European Committee which distilled the views and advice of a small coterie of Central European experts and propagandists centered around Chatham House's Royal Institute of International Affairs. The committee promoted the creation of a confederation of Central European nations under London's control. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, let's do that. Let's have a confederation, and then we'll control it. British thinking. And British thinking is no less absurd than Vatican thinking. It's all absurd, and this is how the wars start, because you have these absurd ideas that drive policy. Okay. Churchill wrote to President Roosevelt, quote, "As you know, the idea of Vienna becoming the capital of a large Danubian federation has always been attractive to me, though I should prefer to add Hungary, to which Uncle Joe is strongly opposed." Nor did the emerging military and strategic landscape affect the Vatican's view. At the beginning of 1945, in a review of post-war hopes for Europe, Pope Pius XII favored an anti-communist Central European Federation of Catholic states. Well, of course he did. Quote, "which would stretch from the Baltic to the Black Seas," unquote. As late as July 1945, With the Red Army occupying most of the Danubian region, the goal of a federation remained a British priority because any others seemed unacceptable. The British sought to directly influence and shore up their support in Central and Southeastern Europe, and the idea of a pan-Danubian federation still carried weight in intelligence circles. The concept remained a general, if imprecise, objective because the planners still required the protection of Britain's most important communication routes to the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. This was pursued as a realistic goal, and it was naively hoped that the Soviets would recognize the value of a federation. The Dulles brothers, though, were not to play a part in the construction of an anti-communist league along the Danube. So there's a split between Churchill and the Dulles brothers. Always important to find where the fault lines are. As the Red Army rolled across the Austrian border, MI6 unveiled its plan to launch a political league against Bolshevism and to provide material aid for anti-Soviet counterespionage and paramilitary operations. British intelligence, and more particularly the remnants of SOE, were convinced that it would not be long before war broke out with their former Soviet allies. By summer, a number of MI6's most experienced officers and Balkan experts were already well established in the British zone in Austria. Officers were posted to Graz and Klagenfurt under the cover of the Civil Liaison Office to penetrate the emigre groups in order to recruit suitable foot soldiers. Using a well-established tactic, Masonic lodges were created to attract, quote, the most eminent leaders in the Balkans, unquote. Using a well-established tactic, Masonic lodges were created. Wow. So did you ever see anybody say that that was a well-established tactic before? Well, this is Stephen Dorril. He's got the inside information. So now with that knowledge, you can look back and say, well, what about all those Masonic lodges that got created in India, in Ireland, in America, in Boston, in Charleston, South Carolina? Were all these Masonic lodges created by somebody that just thought, hey, I think I want to have a Masonic lodge. I feel like a Masonic person, and I want to have, I want to wear the Mason emblem because I really like that emblem. I want to be a Mason. Did anybody really just wake up one day and say, I want to be a Mason? Well, maybe they did because the Masons were running the local economy. Maybe if you wanted to work, you had to be a Mason. Maybe if you wanted to be a merchant. Maybe if you wanted to rise up in the aristocratic society. Maybe if you wanted to be a friend of the king or the Prince of Wales. Maybe that's why you would want to be a Mason. But this is not somebody saying, I want to be a Mason. This is putting Masonry into an area where you want to recruit people for Secret Service work and to say, okay, this is our time-honored tactic. What we'll do is we will create Freemasonry in, say, I don't know, Graz or, Tirana or somewhere in, Ljubljana. And it's going to be the most fun Freemasonry club ever. And we're going to recruit people and we're going to turn them into agents of British intelligence. Well, did that happen in the United States in the 1700s and 1800s? Yeah, I'd say most definitely. Is that maybe why John Quincy Adams wrote his pamphlet against Masonry? Is that why he said the secret oaths conflict with our Constitution? Is it because of secret oaths somehow enable them to be spies. Not all of them, maybe not even 2 or 3% of them. But the ones that they need, the ones that they can flip, they are the goal. And to establish a Freemason lodge in order to achieve the policy goals of an intelligence agency, or to just to recruit agents or put them in a blackmail situation. Yeah, it's the bait. Come be a Mason. Our channel says John Quincy Adams was a Freemason. I don't think so. Let's see who that is. Nope. MI6 was said to be in a hurry and didn't want to lose any time, and its officers did not discriminate in their efforts, which included giving succor even to Nazis and the Ustashi. A network of émigré centers was established in Italy, Austria, and Germany, as well as Paris and London, which reached into all parts of the Balkans. The vehicle for this renewed anti-Bolshevik crusade was the MI6-backed Central European Federal Study Clubs and their militant umbrella group, the revived pre-war organization, Intermarium. The nucleus of East Central Federal thought, Intermarium, was reactivated at the end of 1944 by intelligence personnel and officers and men of the Polish Second Army Corps in Italy. Its journal was immediately smuggled into Poland under German as well as Soviet occupation and stimulated an interest in the cause of European integration. In London, a study club with support from MI6 and the Polish government in exile was resurrected under the presidency of August Zaleski and its secretary, Karl Locher, who had worked in the Czech Foreign Office, with representatives from Slovakia, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Romania, and Yugoslavia. One of its first acts was to create in October 1945 a refugee and propaganda organization, the quote, Scottish League for European Freedom, unquote, which would be responsible as an MI6 front group for, quote, rescuing a number of the Intermarium assets. Equally involved in Intermarium was French intelligence, following an order from President de Gaulle, a strong advocate of a pan-Danubian federation, to adopt an aggressive campaign, quote, to gain the sympathy of the peoples of Eastern Europe. The Deuxième Bureau, stationed in Austria, was tasked with creating a counterweight to British plans in the region based on contacts made in the 30s in Paris with intelligence networks in Innsbruck and Freiburg. On the ground, however, from the beginning of the project, MI6 officers tentatively liaised with their French counterparts to coordinate operations. Within a year of the war's end, MI6 had helped to build up Intermarium into a well-developed movement, which was regarded as, quote, the only organization of international character for combating the Russians, unquote. A 14-page free Intermare charter was published, appealing to Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Poles, Ukrainians, White Ruthenians, Czechs, Slovaks, Hungarians, Romanians, Serbs, Croats, Slovenians, Albanians, and Greeks, quote, to subordinate sovereignty to a higher European authority, unquote. The problem was that the internal divisions among the national groups were all too noticeable, and there was a tendency, quote, to deposit all these quarrels on the lap of this future authority. While the Poles were a major influence, the top echelon of Intermarium became increasingly dominated by ex-fascist leaders and known collaborators. It organized around a core of Croatian Ustashi, Slovakian Hlinka Guard, and Hungarian Arrow Cross members, and a sprinkling of extremist Poles, Ukrainians, Slovenes, and Latvians. Many were, quote, regular go-betweens for MI6 and Abwehr agent handlers. veterans of the Prometheus nets the British had rigged between the wars. They included, and then there's a number of them, Miha Krek, president of the Catholic Slovene People's Party, Krunoslav Draganovic, the quasi-official representative of the Croats, a Catholic priest. He was wanted as a war criminal. Casimir Pape, who had been Poland's ambassador to the Vatican. Monsignor Ivan Buchko, who was regarded as the spiritual leader of the Ukrainian resistance movement. Ferdinand Durkansky, who had been the Slovak Foreign and Interior Minister and was wanted as a war criminal for helping to slaughter Slovakian Jews. Ferenc Vacca, a senior Intermarium leader and the organization's chief propagandist. He had been hidden by the emigre underground in one of the many monasteries in the Rome area. Vacca had been a leading anti-Semite in the Hungarian clerical fascist Arrow Cross Party. Since the early 30s, as a journalist in Rome, he had operated in underground emigre politics, working on behalf of the Hungarian secret services with contacts with a number of Western intelligence agencies. A generally unsavory character, Vacca was a trusted and loyal agent of the Nazis in Budapest, and during 1944 served as consul general for the regime in Vienna. In this role, he organized the escape routes for refugees fleeing Arrow Cross members and helped save the great majority of Hungary's bourgeoisie and aristocracy from the advancing Red Army. At the end of the war, Vacca had been placed on a blacklist of wanted war criminals and was detained by the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps and interned for a short period at Dachau. He was, however, quickly released on the orders of an anonymous British military intelligence officer. Intermarium and its intelligence assets were intimately linked to the Vatican, which worked in close collaboration with British and French intelligence. On the 25th of June, 1945, representatives of the notorious Croat Ustashi had made contact with Archbishop Andreas Rohacher of Salzburg in the American zone in Austria and had asked for the Pope's assistance in creating an independent Croatian state and support for a pan-Danubian federation as a bastion against the Serbian-backed Yugoslavia. Rohacher approached the Allies and offered to put the Ustashi at their disposal, a proposal the British immediately accepted. Now, you understand the Ustashi are notorious war criminals, right? Intermarium's most active branch was in Rome and joined with the Vatican, according to a USCIC report, under direct leadership of the Pope in the battle against atheistic communism. The use of the Catholic Church in the anti-communist struggle was discussed by the Foreign Office's Russia Committee in May 1946. The majority view was that it was necessary to keep a distance, but there were some suggestions that opportunities might occur in the future for using the influence of the Vatican on specific matters. The committee was of the opinion that the Catholic Church was one of the most powerful anti-communist influences. It might be of advantage without directly seeking the cooperation of the Vatican to assist the Church in deploying its influence by facilitating the movement of its emissaries or by other inconspicuous means. It was recommended that the representative at the Vatican should be furnished with information regarding communist activities for use in his contacts with members of the papal entourage. So you see what's coming together here is a joint effort between the Vatican and the British Foreign Service, in MI6, the exterior spy agency of British intelligence. And that is the basis for what becomes Operation Gladio. And the Cold War itself is fought out with these pieces in place on the chessboard. So without understanding this concept of a pan-Danubian area that stretches from the Baltic states down to Ukraine and from in some people's vision, including the Balkans and Greece. But the idea is to have a powerful buffer state. Now, you could have built a powerful buffer state there without rearming Germany, but that's not what we did. And this is where we start seeing the compromise, where, the Vatican is cool with these war criminals. British intelligence is cool with these war criminals. The Dulles brothers are cool with these war criminals. And so let's bring some of them into the United States. Maybe they'll be useful here someday. And that's what they did. And that's the background. That's where McDuff comes in. That's where the Cold War and the 60s began. In Churchill, the Vatican, working together with the Nazis on the theory that it's going to help them somehow contain the Soviet Union. And now that same area from the Baltic, Lithuania, right, won't let the train go through to Königsberg, right, or Kaliningrad, sorry, won't let the train go to Kaliningrad, even though the treaty says they have to let the train go through, because they're going to be part of this coalition that happens to look a lot like Intermarium. Have a great afternoon, folks. I'll see you tomorrow.